Hey, it's Chris from Liege Games. So, you're starting a collection, right? Now, let's sidestep this for a second. Not for me, not for maybe everyone out there that's been in this hobby for years and years, and you've played dozens and dozens of games, and you know what you like and you know what you don't like. Let's talk a second. If you were brand new to this hobby, this is who this video is for. What games would I recommend if I said 10 games, fill your collection up, have a little bit of everything that are going to appeal to a broad base that there is a high chance that you're going to like and potentially keep? Because we also all know that if you start off, you play not as much as you buy, and you end up then with things that you do not like. So I took a look at things that I played, I liked personally, but also games that were not for me necessarily, and said, what of these would be a good starting collection for people to have? Now, again, I'm trying to be very broad here so that you get a little bit of everything so that you can cover most of your eventualities. So that is where this list is coming from. Now, again, let me put a little disclaimer on here. This is games without expansions. Meaning, you know what? You can pick up this game, be very happy with it, and not need an expansion. So things like, let's say, Marvel Legendary are not going to be on there because you really get the best bang for your buck with the expansions. But you're also getting this. Things like, an intro worker placement a la Champions of Midgard. But it really shines just like Lords of Waterdeep with the expansion. So I kind of disqualified those. I also tried to make it games that are friendly for those that might not be as experienced or ingrained with the terminology, with the mechanisms. And last criteria here, I did not go high end, super expensive. I wanted it to be affordable because the last thing you want to be doing is putting down a grand or $500 or $600 to find out that $400 or $500 of those games are not fitting with you. So something that is more budget friendly, if you will. So with that in mind, those criteria set forth, what do we got? We're looking at a total budget of about $300. So if you're looking at your brother or sister-in-law and you're looking for gifts, if you're looking for those sorts of things, this list is perfect for that. Let's take a look. And no particular order, starting with number 10. Now I thought I'd pull it up here so you can see more pictures and more gameplay details than me just throwing a little image in the upper right hand corner and trying to figure it out from that side of things. So, starting with number 10. Now, some of you are going to like this, some of you aren't. But this was one of my original gateway games, and I think it brings a very easy mechanism to the table for people to understand. There's a little bit of battling, there are powers, it's rolling dice. And yes, you're going to have people that aren't a fan of rolling dice in general, but this is mass appeal. Now, why this edition? Because I think this has everything in a complete set that you can argue, like I mentioned before, the base game of the original King of Tokyo doesn't really. You really need the power-up expansion. So that's why King of Tokyo Dark in that sense. It is Yahtzee monsters battling. It's just fun. It's really easy to get to the table. And that's the other thing you're going to see on this list is how easy, overhead-wise, is it to get to the table? And this is very, very simplistic. People are going to understand it. People are going to like it. But, there is a little bit of take that. And so it appeals to both sides. If you want some take that, or if you don't, it's not a long game, so you're not going to have to sit on the sidelines for too long either. That's why it's number 10. Number 9, Space Base. Now, we're sticking with the rolling theme. The dice rolling, the randomization, the mitigation, though, in this case. If you're not familiar with what Space Base is, Space Base takes a different version of the Yahtzee, takes a different version of the resource management, and does it in a very unique way. They do it in one of the best ways competitively to engage people at the table when you are not doing simultaneous play. And that is a mechanism where you are rolling dice, and on your turn, you get a resource based on what you roll. Either the sum of the dice or a resource based on both individual dice. Now, how you're engaging other people at the table is they also have the ability to do the same thing in terms of resource gathering from a passive amount. And so each person is engaged on every single turn, every single die roll, every single decision. And then you're using those collective resources, money, planets, little rockets as your victory points, in order to score the most little victory points while buying those upgrades for your tableau for each individual die number or sum as rocket ships that will be either deployed into the active slot, bumping then something out into the passive slot. Rinse and repeat. And it does it in a unique manner. There is enough variability between the cards that you feel like you're getting a difference each time you play. And honestly, there's a little bit of just randomization. And again, if you don't like the dice, you're not going to like this one as much, but it takes the often malaligned Machi Koro and improves it. Now, I chose this one over something like Valeria Card Kingdoms because this one is a little bit more resource, not scarce, but resource tight. Valeria Card Kingdoms, the biggest pro-con is that you are just given a ton no matter what. And with this one, it limits it more in that sense. But it is dice rolling, group engaging, easy overhead fun. And again, not including the Shy Pluto expansion, obviously, which makes this game even 10 times better. But it is a hit with almost every single person I've played. And I say that as someone who went 0 for 21 on a losing streak as well. So that is number 9. That is Space Base. Next up, number 8. And I can't think of a worse name for a game than The Game. But this is the quintessential card game you can play with anybody and get to the table really quickly, because the concept is one of those concepts where you wish you would have thought of it, and why didn't I think of this before someone else? Right? The game is relatively simple. Haha. So you have 4 stacks. 2 stacks start at 1, and you have to play numbers that are ascending. 2 stacks start at 100 and are descending. And the object in this cooperative card game is just to get rid of all of the cards in the whole deck, numbering individually uniquely between 2 and 99. The lower number of cards that you're left with at the end when somebody cannot play a card determines how well you do. And that sounds easy. Well, there's no table talk. Well, there's very limited table talk. The one other thing you need to know is you can reset the cards a little bit by playing 10 in the opposite direction of the way you're going. So if you're going up and there's a 20 on the board, you can play a 10 to sort of reset it. Or vice versa. If you're going down and there's a 20 on the board, you can play a 30. That's it. It's simple. It's unique. It's easy to get to the table. I have played it so many times. And again, broad mass appeal. Low cost. It's great. And as a side note, if you prefer the head-to-head version, they're coming out with a 2-player head-to-head version of this game as well from Pandasaurus. That's why The Game is one of the games that I would recommend. Number 7. Now, there are a lot of trick takers out there, but as a fan of trick takers and having played a lot of them, this one, The Crew, takes another different spin on it as a cooperative trick taker. And that sounds a little odd, it sounds a little easy, but there are 50 scenarios or missions that this gives you with different variants, different turn orders, different requirements in how you take tricks, in the order you take tricks, in what you can do cooperatively during those tricks, and puts a little spin on its head while still making you go, why didn't I think of this? It's easy to get to the table, it's easy to play, but it makes you think just enough that it's different than a lot of the other trick takers out there, because it's not head-to-head competitive who can get the most, whoever can be the most creative about how you're getting them. It is still whoever can be the most creative about how you're getting them, but you're doing it to assist the fellow players around the table, not outthink or outdo them. Now, the problem with this game, I'll say this right out, it's not a perfect game by any means. If you just get dealt bad hands, there's not a whole lot you can do sometimes, and you're just kind of SOL. But the good thing is, you play a hand, it might take you 3, 4, 5 minutes at most, and then you can just play it again. you will find yourself, if you like this or it interests you at all, playing easily 3, 4, 5, 6 missions in a row. And so it engages people again to think and to enjoy themselves without feeling like you're trying to always just beat other people at the table too. Because it's nice not to have games that are always, I win, you lose. We win or we lose. And the price point doesn't hurt as well. So that's why the crew makes the list. Now, I wasn't kidding when I'm going in all of the broad categories and mechanisms here. And we are going with a social deduction party style game. And there are lots to choose from in this genre. You can make a good argument that a ton of these would fit. But I think, again, the broadest, most appealing one of all of them, for me personally, that engages the most, that is still just a heck of a wild, chaotic time, is Deception Murder in Hong Kong. This is probably the only thing on the list that I would take the place of for Codenames as the broadest appealing game. Now, if you're not familiar with what Deception Murder Hong Kong is it takes one person, it makes them sort of the game narrator, where they cannot speak, but they are using clues to try to get everyone else to guess which character is secretly werewolfed. Each player is dealt 4 clue cards and 4 means or weapons or motive of how you killed the person cards. And via a heads down, thumbs up, werewolf-esque mechanism, the killer reveals themselves to the game narrator, picks one of said clue cards, as well as one of said means cards that is in front of them, and then the other players are forced to guess via how the GM, if you will in this case, gives them clues. Clues are given via these 6 central boards that are put out in terms of location, cause of death, and various descriptions along the murder that are left to interpretation because the game master, the detective, the clue giver cannot verbally say anything. They are only allowed to place the bullet on the one that matches the closest in their head, hopefully being on the same page mentally as the other detectives out there that are trying to figure out which one of them is actually a wolf in sheep's clothing. There are twists in the game that can come out. There are also variants that include said accomplice to the murder, or a witness or a forensic scientist. So you can werewolf it up if you want, but if you just want to play investigators against one sole murderer, it's great too. And it is a great, chaotic, take that verbally with a little bit more than something like Resistance or Werewolf. It's a whodunit social deduction style. It's unique, it's easy to play, people will want to take turns, and it has more than just I yell the loudest against other people. And it gives each person an equal ability to guess who they think it is. And for that, you just made the list. Deception Murder in Hong Kong at number 6. Now, number 5. The Granddaddy, if you will. The original. The often replicated, copied, changed, but never quite duplicated. I'm talking about El Grande. And again, I say this as a non-area control, guy-ish on a map sort of person in general. But the simplicity of the overhead of El Grande as a guys on the map, as an area control, straightforward, but so replayable and so complex in its simplicity, so elegant at the same time, that it is a classic for a reason. Now, as with the big box here, there's plenty of expansions, but all you really need is just the core game, which provides the best experience in an area control, I will argue, almost of any game out there, even despite being made 26 years ago. It is still, I believe, the king among kings in this type of genre or mechanism. The rules are literally like 2 or 3 pages. The drafting, the taking of cards between rounds allows for as much take that or not as you want in terms of how friendly you decide to be. The rounds are straightforward in terms of round, score, round, score, round, end game. it shows modern gamers and modern game designers that you do not have to have more. I would argue, I just read an article online that talks about the exact opposite. Taking away sometimes is more innovative and intuitive than just adding another mechanism, adding another nuance, adding another variable. And the example they use for great effect in that article was balance bikes. Take kids, get rid of their training wheels. Don't use training wheels. Don't even put pedals on their bikes. Give them a bike with no pedals whatsoever. They learn to balance, and then they learn to ride their bike much faster. I have kids who have first-hand experience that is true, and this game exemplifies just that concept on the tabletop form. It distills it into the most pure area control game that you can without losing all of the depth, the thought, the strategy, as well as the tactical nature at the same time. And that is why it is so highly thought of. And that is why I would argue that it should be in every gamer's collection, especially if you're starting one off. And that's why it's number 5 on this list. Now, this is probably at number 4, the most controversial game on this list. And I'm sure a lot of you will disagree with me. Euro worker placement style games. Low overhead, easy entry, appealing, but still entertaining. Those are the criteria for this list as a whole. And that is why Everdell, I think, fits in this very well. Now, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you included expansions, I would make a case that pound for pound, there are better games that are maybe more introductory. Champions of Midgard, Lords of Waterdeep, those sorts of things. Castles of Burgundy, even. I know, I'm getting into the controversial stuff. I think this is a better gateway for people that are not familiar. The concept is easy. The rules are very easy, low to get to the table, especially for a worker placement. It's very intuitive. It's colorful. It's attractive with the artwork. Yes, it is not the most purely strategic game on the list of the Euro worker placement style games that you could pick. No doubts. I'm not going to argue that point. But in terms of attracting people to the hobby, in terms of eye candy appeal to get people to come to the table in the first place, you have to argue that it is near the top of that. Again, before you even talk about adding expansions. Again, you can comment that yes, some of the cards are too repetitive, some of the objectives are too obtuse, but you cannot argue the fact of it is popular and it is a hit for all of those reasons that I have mentioned already. It gives you a little bit of a hand management, not deck building, but similar tableau management as well as worker placement, without being too free with the resources at higher player counts, but also without feeling so cutthroat that newer players are going to be at such a significant disadvantage that they're not going to want to play halfway through the game because they feel like they've already lost and they cannot make it up. And that is a very delicate balance to make, especially when you are inviting newer people to the table who may not have experienced this type of thing before, making it very welcoming while still engaging them significantly. And Everdell does just that, from the art to the style to the presentation to the mechanisms. And again, I'm not arguing that this is the best out there, but for a collection like this starting off, it's very welcoming. And that's why I think it should be included on this list at number 4. Now, some of you are wondering at this point, what other classics are you going to see on this list? Well, here is your tile laying and auction combination. Contrary to what you might think of as the prototypical collection game of Carcassonne, I think Isle of Skye is better, more engaging, because it adds just a little bit more to it, and I think it gives people a little bit of flavor of managing their own tile placement while still introducing them to as well the other auction mechanism that I just mentioned. It also introduces the variable scoring conditions between the rounds, where you're scoring A, B, AC, BD, ADC, DBC, and then you're ending. To give players different thoughts on each round on which they should be maximizing, how they should be achieving things, while still trying to figure out what bidding is going to be appropriate in each round as well. I have seen it replicated It takes mechanics that many of us are familiar with in terms of just the pure tile placement, but it adds a numerous amount of icons, much more than the base level Carcassonne, which again, if you want to make that argument that if you add one or two of the expansions in with Carcassonne, I probably won't argue that you could equally put that in. But talking about, again, just the base game, I think the depth and the multiple layers of mechanisms without feeling overwhelming makes this a higher priority to a list than Carcassonne for me. It also works well at variable player counts. So it has that going for it in addition to something like the 2-player tile laying games that you might see out there as well. And then that is not even to mention all of the various scoring tiles that you can be using and interchanging between the games to give each game a drastically different feel, not only depending on which 4 are chosen, but in the order in which they are put on the board for the combinations in which the rounds will be scored as well. I will not hold back and say that this is anything but my favorite, or one of my top favorite tile laying games, period. I feel that strongly about it that it edges out other games in this category for me as a starter collection type of game that you will enjoy repeatedly and repeatedly. And that's why it's number 3. Now we're getting down to the nitty gritty, right? What's going to be included? What isn't going to be included? And again, I am going across the board. And that's why I'm going across the board. Years 19 and 2020, we have seen the emergence or the resurgence of roll and writes. And with the price point, with the player count, with the simultaneous play mechanisms, I think one should be almost a staple in people's collections. And I'd like this one, Cartographers, the role player tale universe setting, as the one to appeal to a broad base. Ease of Tetris style placement? Check. Limited number of variables and types of things you're going to be putting down on your map in the first place? Check. Variable scoring conditions? Check. A little bit of take that, if you so choose? Also, check, just to add to the chaos factor if you and your group enjoy that. But you could easily also leave it out. A little bit of the fantasy theme thrown in there as well to attract those who are interested, but also not to scare away those that find it off-putting. Again, as a roll and write, the simultaneous play at higher player counts gives your collection now at least 2 games out of 10 that you can play with more than 4 or 5 people on a consistent basis, which, although it's not the most popular player count often, that is a critique in terms of getting things together that are not just purely social party games. And so it fills another niche or spot there as well. And price point, again, is a winner. If price point was less of an issue for this list, I would have put Let's Make a Bus Route on this because I prefer that overall. But thinking and looking at your wallet from that side of things, pound for pound, this is a better deal at the price point. That's why it's number 2 on this list. Now, number 1, you didn't actually think that I was going to have this list without a co-op game, did you? A multiplayer, pandemic-esque co-op game. And you would be correct, but this is the iteration that I think is the most variable, I think is the most different and replayable without adding the expansions again, and is the most worthwhile and engaging from a thematic standpoint. Iberia is set in Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula, where you are stomping out one of 4 diseases. There are variable modes that you can play in, but the basic mode is hard enough as it is that it will engage all players of variable skill and strategy. I mean, at its heart, don't get me wrong, it is still pandemic. It is still stomp out the fires, don't let the outbreaks happen, or you're going to lose. Build the hospitals, research the diseases, don't get overwhelmed, but have a few slightly different nuances with the trains and the ports to give you some variable. Arguably, I think it's better than Cthulhu. I think it's better than Fall of Rome. I think it's better than any of the other standalone without the expansion games as well. Now, you can make an argument again on the slightly pandemic heavier side of co-ops. My personal favorite being The Loop or Aeon's End, but both are going to be more of a potential price point that is before this one went out of print. And so it's a little bit more pricier now, but I think, again, as something that is going to attract people and not have too much complexity, because let's be honest, as fun as Aeon's End is and as fun as The Loop is, there is a higher degree of difficulty, a higher degree of a learning curve for them. Not for necessarily everybody, but for introducing it to new people, this is relatively straightforward. Take your 4 actions, mitigate stuff, put down disease, stomp out your stuff, draw new cards, rinse and repeat, go around the table. You can have a little bit of quarterbacking in a positive sense to teach people what to do, but then they can very quickly get on their balance bike, learn how to do it, and sail off on their own. Not to mention the different disease states that you can add in to make this game completely different, to make the difficulty harder, or to just make it completely different than just the base setting as well. So that is why this is the essential pandemic-esque, pandemic version game that I would include on this list. So that's it. That's the list. 10 games, starter collection for price point under, all in for Season 1 of Batman Gotham City Chronicles, or Primal the Awakening, if you will. Games that have broad mass appeal, that are going to be hits more than misses for a vast majority of people looking to come into the hobby. And if that's you, go try stuff out. Frankly speaking, don't buy stuff on this list. Try before you buy. That is the biggest piece of advice I can give. But all of these games on this list are solid and well thought of for a good reason. But, again, your mileage may vary, as I said, depending on the game, depending on your own personal preferences. So, just going to have to see what happens when you play them. There you go. That's it. Those are my thoughts. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. If you liked it, throw me a sub. As always, stay classy. I'll see you around.